When I was discharged from the military hospital, I still could not get out of bed on my own. The doctors warned me that I might never walk again without assistance. But the real blow was not written in my medical chart. It was waiting for me on the kitchen table. Beside the divorce papers sat a notice from a realtor confirming the sale of our home. My husband had taken the money, disappeared with another woman, and left me homeless before I was even discharged. My name is Morgan Rachel Carter, though most people call me Rachel. I was 36 years old when it happened. I had served in the United States Army, owned a house in suburban Virginia, and planned to attend college after leaving the military. At least, I believed I still had those things. That morning, an orderly helped me move from the hospital bed into my wheelchair. A nurse checked my medication, discharge papers, and rehabilitation schedule several times. I held a small bag on my lap and tried not to look at my legs. My left leg barely moved. I still had some feeling in my right leg, but the doctors offered no guarantees. I had been injured when a roadside explosive detonated near our vehicle. The blast threw us sideways, metal fragments pierced the protective panel, and the impact damaged my spine. 2 people from our unit died at the scene. I survived. For months in the hospital, I kept telling myself that survival was already a victory. My husband, Daniel, called less and less often, but I blamed his silence on work, stress, and fear. He kept saying it was difficult for him to see me like that. At the time, I believed those words revealed his pain. I did not understand that they meant something entirely different. During the final 2 weeks before my discharge, Daniel almost stopped contacting me. He said he had been sent on a business trip and would leave the house key with our neighbor. She was the one who picked me up from the hospital because my husband supposedly could not return in time. Her name was Carol, and she remained strangely quiet throughout the entire drive. She gripped the steering wheel and gave short answers, as though she was afraid of saying too much. When we turned onto my street, I noticed an unfamiliar pickup truck parked outside the house. Children's bicycles stood on the front porch. New curtains hung behind the window I had personally decorated with Christmas lights before my final deployment. Carol pulled over and finally told me the house no longer belonged to us. The sale had closed 11 days earlier. At first, I thought she had misunderstood something. The property was in both our names, so Daniel could not legally sell it without my signature. At least, that was how it was supposed to work. Carol drove me to her house. That was where I found a large envelope waiting on her kitchen table. Inside were divorce papers, a copy of the home sale agreement, and a bank notice confirming that our joint account had been closed. My name appeared at the bottom of the documents. The signature looked like mine, but I had never written it. Our savings were gone. The money from the home sale had been transferred into an account I could not access. Daniel had left Virginia with a woman I had only seen once at a military event. Her name was Vanessa. He had introduced her as an employee at an accounting firm that helped him with taxes. That evening, I sat in my wheelchair in the middle of another woman's kitchen and tried to understand how someone could lose her body, marriage, home, and savings almost at once. After the explosion, I had believed the worst moment was already behind me. In reality, my old life had only started collapsing. Carol allowed me to stay in her guest room, but her house was not wheelchair accessible. I could not properly use the bathroom. The doorways were too narrow, and the stairs made the second floor unreachable. The next day, a social worker found me temporary housing for veterans. It was a tiny ground floor apartment in an aging residential complex. A portable ramp had been placed beside the entrance. The bathroom had safety rails, and the kitchen was so narrow that I could touch both walls by spreading my arms. That night, I was left there alone. There was a bottle of water, a carton of milk, and a plastic container of soup in the refrigerator. All my belongings fit into 2 bags because Daniel had either removed my possessions or left them behind for the new homeowners. Even my military photographs were missing. He had taken my medals, letters from my father, and the old wooden box where I kept my mother's wedding ring. The worst part was not realizing that Daniel had left me for another woman. The worst part was knowing he had planned everything for months while I lay in a hospital learning how to hold a spoon again. A lawyer provided by a veterans organization quickly found evidence that my signature had been forged. Recovering the money, however, was far more complicated. Daniel had moved some of the funds through several accounts. He used another portion to pay off personal debts. The house had already been purchased by a family who knew nothing about the fraud. An investigation began, but the legal system moved more slowly than my injured body. Every day brought the same exhausting routine. In the morning, I practiced moving from the bed into my wheelchair. Then I attended physical therapy, where I tried to force my muscles to respond to signals I could barely feel. After therapy, I called banks, insurance companies, and attorneys. Bills arrived every evening. Daniel had opened 2 credit cards using our shared financial information. While I was overseas, he used my trust, my personal documents, and a power of attorney I had given him before deployment. I had signed that document because I believed it was the responsible thing to do. That piece of paper became a weapon against me. Several times, I nearly accepted an unfair settlement. I wanted the case closed. I wanted to stop seeing his name in every envelope. My attorney convinced me not to rush. He explained that people who depend on your exhaustion are often waiting for you to surrender quickly. Daniel knew how tired I was. He believed I would not have the strength to fight. The first year after my return felt longer than the rest of my life combined. I endured 2 more surgeries, several infections, and months of rehabilitation. One night, I fell between my bed and wheelchair. My phone was sitting on a table only a few feet away, but I could not reach it. I remained on the floor for nearly 3 hours until a neighbor heard me moving. That was the moment my fear turned into anger. I realized I had been waiting for rescue from people who had already shown how little my safety meant to them. After that night, I began setting small goals. First, I learned how to lift myself after a fall. Then I learned to drive a car fitted with hand controls. Eventually, I began moving between parallel bars while supporting my own weight. Every movement hurt. My muscles burned, my back ached, and my right leg shook so violently that the therapist stood beside me during every step. But pain no longer felt like an enemy. It became proof that my body was still trying to return to life. The financial pressure remained just as severe. After medical costs and legal expenses, I had almost nothing left. I began recording every purchase in a spreadsheet. I canceled cable television, bought clothes from thrift stores, and learned to prepare meals that lasted several days. Once I had to choose between repairing the brakes on my wheelchair and paying the electric bill. That was when I contacted a Veterans Assistance Fund for the first time. I felt ashamed to ask for help. I believed strong people were supposed to survive on their own. Later, I understood how dangerous it was to confuse strength with silent suffering. 2 years after the injury, I took my first 7 steps with a walker. A therapist and 2 other veterans were in the room, but I could barely see them through my tears. 7 steps did not restore the life I once had. They proved that my future could still move forward. Soon afterward, I enrolled in an online financial counseling program. The career choice almost felt ironic because my own accounts had been emptied. But I understood how easily trust could become debt. I knew how financial control worked inside a marriage. I understood what it felt like when someone hid accounts, forged documents, and convinced you not to ask questions. Studying was difficult. The injury caused migraines and problems with concentration. Some pages had to be read several times before I understood them. Still, I graduated with honors. My first job was at a small nonprofit organization that helped military families escape debt. The salary was modest, but for the first time in years, I felt in control of my life. My clients told stories that sounded painfully familiar. One partner had hidden loans. Another had spent family savings on an affair. Some women had been pressured to sign papers without being told what they meant. I did not share every detail of my past, but I always told them to review their statements, protect copies of important documents, and maintain personal access to money. I had once been taught that marriage required unconditional trust. Life taught me to verify even the people I loved. The legal case against Daniel lasted almost 4 years. By then, he was living in Colorado with Vanessa. They had purchased a large house, started a construction company, and presented themselves as a successful married couple. In court, Daniel claimed that I had authorized the sale of our home. He said our marriage had been failing for years and that every financial decision had been made by mutual agreement. He also told people I had developed serious mental health problems after the injury. The lies themselves did not surprise me most. What shocked me was how easily he turned my trauma into his defense. A handwriting expert proved the signature was forged. The court ordered him to return part of the money and found him responsible for financial fraud. But most of the funds were already gone. I recovered far less than I had lost, yet the case was never only about money. For the first time, an official document confirmed that I had not imagined the betrayal. I had not agreed to the sale, and I had not forgotten giving permission. Daniel had done it deliberately. 6 years after the injury, I could walk short distances with a cane. On difficult days, I still used my wheelchair, but I no longer saw it as a symbol of defeat. It was a tool that gave me freedom. I bought a small house in Maryland. It had a bedroom on the first floor, wide hallways, and a backyard with an old maple tree. On my first night there, I slept on a mattress without a bed frame because the furniture had not arrived. Still, the key rested in my hand. Nobody could sell that house without my knowledge. Eventually, I opened my own financial counseling practice. We helped veterans and women recovering from financial abuse. The number of clients grew, so I hired 2 employees. Within several years, our program was working with hospitals, shelters, and veteran centers across 3 states. I began receiving invitations to speak at conferences. I sat before audiences of 200 people and discussed financial warning signs without ever mentioning my former husband by name. Meanwhile, Daniel continued building his new life. He married Vanessa, and they had 2 children. From the little information that reached me, his company appeared successful. I never searched for details about them. For years, hearing Daniel's name filled me with heaviness. Eventually, even that disappeared. 17 years passed. I was 53 years old. My back still caused problems. I used a cane, and pain sometimes woke me during the night. But my organization had already helped several thousand people. That morning, I was preparing for a meeting when my phone began vibrating without pause. The first call came from an unfamiliar Colorado number. Then came a second call, a third, and a 10th. Several blank messages appeared. 20 minutes later, I saw Vanessa's name. Her number had remained in my old legal records, so I immediately knew who was calling. I did not answer. By lunchtime, I had 47 missed calls. By evening, the number had passed 100. The next morning, the screen showed 120 missed calls. My assistant believed there had been an emergency. In a way, she was correct. But the danger was no longer aimed at me. Vanessa had performed a simple Google search after noticing an unusual transaction in their joint account. Daniel had transferred a large amount of money to a company she had never heard of. First, she searched the company name. Then she typed in her husband's full name. Among the results was the old court ruling from my case. That was how she discovered that Daniel had sold our house using forged documents, taken money from his wounded wife, and denied the fraud for years. But that discovery was only the beginning. Vanessa reviewed their accounts and found loans taken out without her knowledge. Daniel had used part of the company as collateral, copied her signature, and hidden hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. He was doing to her what he had once done to me. Vanessa believed Daniel had left me after a marriage that had already ended emotionally. He told her I had refused rehabilitation, become unstable, and willingly handed him complete financial control. In his version of the story, he was the victim. Now she understood that she had spent 17 years living inside a story built on lies. One of her emails eventually reached me. There were no excuses and no attempt to shift blame. She asked only whether the court documents were real. I sent her the case number and my attorney's contact information. Nothing else needed to be explained. A few days later, Daniel called. I remembered his number even after 17 years. He left several voice messages. At first, he accused me of destroying his family. Then he begged me not to speak with Vanessa. Later, he mentioned his children, his business, and consequences he claimed he did not deserve. In none of those messages did he ask how I had survived after he left me in a wheelchair without money. Not once did he admit forging my signature. Even after 17 years, he was not concerned about the damage he had caused. He was terrified that the truth no longer belonged to him. That was when I finally understood how insane the situation had become. The man who had taken my home was now demanding that I protect his. The person who had used my vulnerability was asking for mercy because his own scheme was collapsing. Years earlier, I would have given anything to hear him express regret. Now, I no longer needed his words. Vanessa filed for divorce and submitted the financial records to investigators. Some of the company's assets were frozen. I did not follow every stage of the case, but I agreed to provide copies of my old legal documents. My history helped establish a repeated pattern of behavior. Daniel had not changed. He had simply found another person who did not yet know what he was capable of doing. People sometimes asked whether I felt satisfaction as his life began falling apart. The truth was more complicated. I felt sad. Not for him, but for the children and the woman who had spent 17 years beside someone who built intimacy through deception. Vanessa had also made a painful choice years earlier. She began a relationship with a married man while his wife was recovering in a military hospital. But nobody deserves financial destruction. Several months later, we met at a small cafe outside Washington, D.C. Vanessa had traveled there for meetings with her attorneys. We barely discussed Daniel. Instead, she handed me an old wooden box she had found among his belongings. My mother's wedding ring was inside. My military photographs were there, along with a letter my father wrote before his death. For 17 years, I had believed those things were gone. When I saw my younger face in the photographs, I barely recognized the woman wearing that uniform. She believed love required complete trust. She thought marriage meant having no personal boundaries. Part of me wanted to warn her. Another part understood that her mistakes had helped create the woman I became. After returning home, I placed the wooden box near the window. Sunlight fell across its scratched surface while branches from the old maple tree moved slowly outside. My legs ached after the trip. My cane stood beside the wall, and the folded wheelchair remained in the car. I once believed strength meant recovering everything that had been taken from me. Now I understood something different. Sometimes victory does not come from restoring your old life. It comes from building a new one that your abuser can no longer enter. Daniel sold our house, but he could not take my future. He emptied our accounts, but he did not take my ability to earn again. He abandoned me during the darkest season of my life, but he never earned the right to decide how my story would end. His final call came 9 months after Vanessa's first message. I watched the screen light up with the familiar number. This time, I felt neither fear nor anger. I silenced the phone and continued working on an application for a female veteran trying to escape her husband's financial control. Perhaps Daniel finally wanted to apologize. Perhaps he planned to blame me again. I never found out. Some calls do not need to be answered for healing to happen. Sometimes real closure begins when another person's explanation no longer has the power to change your life.